Thank you, Michelle. You can save me at any time from any mistake I make, please. Yeah. Don't you love the little turtle at the end there? So Mark's now going to introduce Michelle for us. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Michelle Maloney, thank you for coming on a public holiday. That takes extra points for doing that from us. Thanks, Michelle. Michelle's an earth-centred human with a passionate love for the living world. She's descended from Irish people who were part of the colonisation of here, and that says volumes about her, I think, and grew up in a little outback town in Queensland. She obtained her Western education in law, politics and governance, and then embarked on a lifelong journey of unlearning and decolonising much of the knowledge that she had gained in her schools and universities. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and history and laws with honours from the Australian National University and a PhD in law from Griffith University. She spent more than 30 years designing and managing climate change, sustainability and community building projects in Australia, the United Kingdom, Indonesia and the USA. She works in solidarity with Indigenous groups and colleagues in central Queensland. And she is also then perhaps founding part of the Earth Laws Alliance, AELA, which she'll probably tell us about in her talk. Her system change works and connects with law, economics, ethics, education, the arts, cross-cultural understanding, and decolonising knowledge systems. I won't go through all the things that she has founded. I'll just give a little sample. She's the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. That's the AELA that we see. Co-founder and director of Future Dreaming Australia. Co-founder and director of the New Economy Network Australia. An adjunct senior fellow with Law Future Centre in Griffith University. Associate Centre for Democratic and Environmental Rights, and a member of the Blue Mountains Planetary Health Advisory Committee, to just mention a few of the things she does in her spare time. Now, I was fortunate enough early this year to hear Michelle speak through the Laudato Si conference that Catholic Religious Australia put on, and I found Michelle's presentation so fresh and different and interesting that I thought, well, this would be great to share with CCJP. So thanks, Michelle, again for that. That's a very short thing of what I could say about you, but we're very welcome and we're looking forward to hearing what you will say to us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. That was a very lovely introduction. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Anne, for organising to have me here today, here being Brisbane. But I might share screen. I have a number of slides. I have lots of slides. I'm very visual, and I'll acknowledge country where I am as well. And just to check in, Anne, you're happy for me to talk for 30 or 40 minutes?
Very, very, Michelle. And then
Okay.
if we have open questions and things like that, if that's all right. Sometimes we put people into groups, but I think we'll just go into questions from those who are here.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll see if my buttons work for me. Here we go. Okay. Doobie. There we go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It really is a delight to share with you information about the work we're doing. And yeah, I'm really grateful to Margaret for recommending to you that I come and have a chat with you. So the general topic that you invited me to address was how can economic and political systems operate to support the ecology of the planet? I added in legal. And once I give you a bit of an overview of how AELA works, you'll see that we kind of look across a whole range of different issues to support systems change work. So I'll tell you all about that. But I don't need to introduce myself because Margaret's done a lovely job. So what I will do is acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in beautiful North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present and emerging leaders and the remarkable civilizational culture that has cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. And when I do my acknowledgement of country, I include two things. Firstly, an acknowledgement of the ongoing impacts of colonisation and our commitment both personally and in our organisations to play some humble part in the decolonisation of hearts and minds so that we can all connect to this place, this beautiful continent, and care for each other and care for country. The second thing is I'll always like to share that this is a beautiful photo from the local waterholes. And I was delighted when I moved here to suburban Brisbane, you know, on the edge of the giant Gateway Highway, and there's remnant waterholes. And I discovered that the Turrbal words were still being used. So these are called the Nudgee waterholes, but they're actually Nudgee Nunda, which is the black duck waterholes, which I thought was just wonderful. Remnants are always very, very sad, but I think given the success of colonialism in Australia, it's fantastic that in Brisbane there are so many places still with their original names. And I'll talk in a moment about our work and personally why Indigenous culture in this country is not only wonderful and fascinating and important, but crucial to our future. So in my talk, and I hope that I don't talk you into a trance, please do interrupt any time with questions. Absolutely not a problem, or sit back and relax with your popcorn and I can chat away forever about this stuff. But I'm going to give you a very brief intro to the theory of earth jurisprudence and Thomas Berry's work, connect that to our work in AILA, and then kind of share with you, I guess, a few snippets of the work we do across a range of topics, themes, fields of work, what Western disciplines think they are: law, Indigenous knowledge, education, and economics. And then I hope that I don't talk too long on those points, because I'd love to share with you the connecting points across all of those elements of the work we do into the systems change proper work that we do with the Green Prince approach. And I will touch on some of the integral ecology sort of themes and headings, not too much, but just to show you how we have been thinking about Green Prince as a really nice way to help lots of different folks bring lots of different ideas together, including responding to Laudato Si. And of course, this is what I'm talking about. I am not the expert on Laudato Si. I'm sure many of you know a lot more about it than me. But later on, when I talk about Green Prince, I'll show how responding to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, as well as ecological economics and sustainable lifestyles, education, spirituality, etc., fit into the work that we do as well. So, earth jurisprudence. Now, firstly, jurisprudence is a big fat name, which really just means like a theory of governance. So if you're a lawyer particularly, but anyone who's got a feminist jurisprudence, you'll be looking across law or governance, particularly looking at how women are treated, what the critiques are of the patriarchy, etc., etc. If you've got a Marxist jurisprudence, you'll be looking at law and governance with from the theory or theoretical point of view of a socialist or someone with those kinds of viewpoints. So earth jurisprudence is very much just a flash way of saying we need to, as Thomas Berry said, center humanity so that the laws and the governance systems that we regulate ourselves by are connected to and focused on the health of the earth. These days, a lot of folks who love earth jurisprudence shorthand it to earth laws, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, which is now turning 10, and I can talk a bit more about its history later, but I'll tell you what we do first. We're working to create systems change. Our goal is to help people in industrialised societies shift away from human-centred governance and transition to earth-centred or life-centred governance. This image is very well used. It's often connected to eco and ego. And very simply put, we hope that we can play a part in moving human societies away from thinking about ourselves at the top of the pyramid, the image on the left, and really seeing ourselves more appropriately as one of many organisms within the earth community, caring for and nourishing the conditions for the earth. And although that's actually a very simple concept, trying to unravel the systems that have grown up over 500 years of European colonization and globalization, that's the tricky stuff. And that's what we are, part of, that thinking about that work and how do we change our systems to care for the earth more appropriately. So this lovely image there talks about, it's really a simple snapshot of how AILA thinks about our work. So we're interested in changing culture, first and foremost, from the day we were born 10 years ago. Very interested in how we can help people nurture an earth-centered worldview. when we say reconnecting with what matters, it's trying to unpick and stitch back together some of our systems in industrialised societies like modern Australia, so that we connect with the human spirit, love of the earth, science, Indigenous knowledge, all the things that matter when it comes to governing ourselves. Building community refers to the fact that AILA is very committed to working with our peers and colleagues and friends inside civil society, particularly from the early days when we were created, when Tony Abbott was literally dismantling many of the good things that we valued, like the Climate Commission, which turned into the Climate Council. They waged a bit of a witch hunt on the environmental defenders offices. They were doing all manner of things to cut back social and environmental protections. So we focused immediately into communities, and really, I think some folks would call it grassroots work, bottom up, although I often object to being considered to be at the bottom when the work we do, I feel, is very much in the middle. Yeah, and then creating alternatives, which I was really pleased. We kind of dreamt that up as the idea, but really that's for the last 5 or 6 years when we've really started to grow a bit, that's where we're really stepping forward and showing how things could be different. So yeah, and so we're interested in systems change, meaning the interconnectedness of how complex systems work socially. But within that, we look at economics, law, education, ethics, the arts, and lots of good things. And Margaret already kindly mentioned that part of our work has been auspicing 2 other organisations and 1 network. Someone once called me a serial social entrepreneur, but I can promise you I'm not creating any new organisations. I've got my hands full with the ones we've got. But there's been a method to the madness, and I'll talk about that. So what's important for Australian audiences particularly to know is that while we were born from, there were 6 of us that started AILA, a very passionate interest in earth jurisprudence, how a Western person like Thomas Berry could speak to us in the way that he wrote about the systems we had created in our culture. It's been incredibly powerful and very important to our work, but equally powerful, and perhaps more so as our work goes on, is the learnings from Indigenous elders. I'm absolutely delighted to be working with, and have been for many years, with Mary Graham. And if you're not familiar with her work, we can chat about her perhaps at the end of today. Her work is beautiful, looks across Aboriginal culture and governance systems and law, and this deep relationist ethos that guided the rules of society. So I see that tree as AILA's inspiration, and our work very much speaking to the Western ideas that many of us were born into the world with, or grew up into the world we were born into, and Indigenous knowledge systems in this continent. So let's talk for a moment about Thomas Berry, and forgive me if you already know all about Thomas Berry. If we were in the room, I'd probably get a show of hands. Who's heard of Thomas Berry? And there's always lots of folks who have. But this is the lovely book that I was lucky to be introduced to back in 2009 at a conference that helped me really go, wow, this is a fantastic framework of thinking to bring action together. So in this book, Thomas Berry critiques what he calls the underpinning structures of industrialised society. And he looked at 4 of the fundamental establishments that control human affairs. And this is Berry's framework, not mine. Law and government, economics, universities and education, and religion. And he said that we have a cultural problem because we're anthropocentric, and European thinking particularly has emerged over many hundreds of years, and some would argue a couple of thousand years, to have a separation from the rest of the living world. But what struck me was not so much the critique of religion or even universities, was just how he brought together a critique of law. So at that point, I had finished my law degree, 15 years before, and had only worked in law for a couple of years before moving on to work with a whole range of Indigenous friends and community development projects, which I believed in a whole lot more. And in a way, the great work brought me back into the fold to say, well, finally, I can be useful in this sort of legal profession, sitting on the outside, poking it and critiquing it, and really helping other people understand why it works the way it does and why it's not actually helping the environment, because our Western legal system was never designed to do that. So this structure, this format of his thinking in this book directly influenced how we created AILA. And I'll talk about the programs we work on in a moment. But just a simple reminder, and I'm sure by being in this group and by being at this talk, you already know all of this stuff, but it's really nice to occasionally literally pause and really contemplate how deeply woven anthropocentrism is into Western culture and many aspects of monotheism, whether that's Christianity or Islam. So Thomas Berry says, the deepest cause of the present devastation is found in a mode of consciousness that has established a radical discontinuity between the human and other modes of being. And as he sets out in his works, he reminds us that it's not just a case of human beings prioritizing ourselves over others. This is a deeply embedded concept that has manifested itself in everything from English property law through to many aspects of the patriarchal system of ownership and aspects like the colonial creation of slavery, the colonial invasion of other places because folks weren't seen to be people if they were not Christians and such. So anthropocentrism is very important, and I still argue that today, after 35 years of working in this field, one of the hardest things to do is to see the journey people have to take before they really unpack anthropocentrism in their own life. So we can talk a bit more about that. And that's not me being in any way arrogant, like I know all things. It's not that. I have worked with folks in government and business and schools and lots of other places. And there are just some people who it takes them either, not in the time I've known them, do they even connect with this idea of we're really not the central fact of the universe, and we're really not the ultimate aim of the universe. You know, we're just one member of the Earth community. So it's a very deeply held view and imbued in all of our institutions, which is very obvious when you start to look at them. So Earth jurisprudence, I think at its simplest, is interested in the ideas that lie beneath the governance, the rules, the systems that we've created as people to support our societies and life. Now, what are the impacts of this idea, these ideas around human-centeredness, and particularly the ideas that if everything out there is for us, then surely we can do whatever we want to it. And that might sound flippant and like, oh, we haven't done that. Well, actually, we kind of have. And I just want to share with you, I think I've got the 2 slides. Yep, there are 2 slides, and these are from Will Steffen and a range of other people connected to Earth system science. And what you will see, so what we've got here is impacts on the planet, and the next one, which I'll show you, are the causes. But what we have seen, if you'll have a look, you can see there's a dotted line there, 1950. And when we're often in the room together, I have this up on the big screen. I say, now let's look at this: carbon dioxide emissions, nitrous oxide, methane, stratospheric ozone, the surface temperature, ocean acidification, marine fish capture, the loss of tropical forests. Every single indicator, when you look across them, I say to people, so what's that line doing? We all say it's going up. And I said, and after 1950, how much faster does that line go up? People can see it's almost exponential growth. Yeah. You can see this massive, and that's why they call it the Great Acceleration. And why do I say that this acceleration of taking things and polluting things back into the world is a natural progression of human-centeredness? Well, it's because if everything out there's for us and we have no constraints, and also there was a perfect storm after the Second World War of increasing technological capacity, like completely changing how we were catching fish, completely changing how we could take down forests and clear the land. But there was also a combination with this profound psychological dominance of the growth economy. And we could talk about that for days, but these graphs really tell the story. Population growth, so-called real GDP, paper production, water use, large dams. You can see absolutely everything went crazy through the roof after the 1950s. And this matters because this is the natural progression of a species that thinks it's more important than everybody else, because it just takes and takes and uses and uses and pollutes without constraint. Another simple example is this is a very high level map of a huge mapping system that the Australian Koala Foundation invested in. You can see that all of this is the land and vegetation cover in 1788. And this white stuff is where it's all gone. And the question we have to ask is, okay, well, if it was all there in 1788, what happened? What's different? You know, what? And I often pose a question, particularly when I talk to young people, because often they just assume it's normal to do that much land clearing, to have done so much land clearing down the eastern coast, that the drying out of the land and the exacerbation of the massive bushfire season, we've had people like Will Steffen, Brendan Mackey and others say it's climate change, but it's also deforestation and the drying out of country. So we have made these terrible things happen, all in the name of, you guessed it, certain ideas around production, consumption and success. This, for example, lines up perfectly with the wheat belt in Western Australia. If we had chosen to grow other crops, particular ways of having agriculture, we might not have done that much harm and have only 1,000 numbats left. So many things to think about. So before I keep rabbiting on about things to you, why don't we take just 2 minutes for a moment, and why don't you have a think in your own world, your life, your work, your family, your community? Can you think of any examples of human-centered thinking and how ecocentrism might see things differently? And this is really just for you. So if you'd like to jot down a couple of ideas, you might think, I think it's human-centered that everybody has strange grassy lawns, that they spend lots of money on chemicals, killing all the wildlife, just so they can have a neat green lawn. I think that's human-centered. And an earth-centered approach would be more native plants, lots more flowers, so we can have the bees and the butterflies. But I'll just be quiet for a moment and let you have a think. Examples of human-centered thinking and practice, and how might they look different? And in fact, if you don't mind, guys, I'll let you have a think about that. I have to grab my glass of water because I left it. I can see it, but I can't reach it. It's in the other room. I'll be 1 second, but you think deeply.
As you come back.
Yes, yeah, I'll come back. You think deeply. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Would anyone like to share? I might stop the share for a moment. Would anyone like to share some thoughts they had? I'll test you and see if you did your homework. Anyone, please just call out.
I think it's interesting where you often see lawns being pulled up and artificial grass being put down. So the
that's even
actual
worse.
lawns used to absorb the water where the artificial grass doesn't.
Oh yeah, the plastic. Oh my goodness. Let's hope one day we look back on that as an abomination, not a normal thing.
We also, households have excessive use of appliances and electrical, TVs, multiple computers, multiple appliances that push the bills up and require the, more consumption of electricity, which is, at the moment anyway, largely based on the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, and people often point to the sort of supply chain of anything from buying a product to using electricity, where we have no clue where it's going, where it's come from. We shouldn't by now actually understand that. But yeah, you press a button, life is comfy, but we're not taught to think about what are the impacts of that. And if you wanted to make room for all of life, what choices would we make? Any other examples in your own world?
Houses are more important than koalas.
Oh gosh, yes. Yes, it's devastating. And people say to me, well, what are we meant to do? People are meant to live somewhere. And I say, well, let's rethink the issue. Why is it that when we come into a new residential development, the developers control the settlement patterns, the developers control how they chop up a block, meaning they have taken all the trees out and then they'll replant gardens. Why can't we have different kinds of houses, different kinds of settlement patterns, so that forests are retained and corridors are retained, and housing is little. Because just remember, the biggest thing that shocked me was, I should have the stat nearby, I use it a lot, but basically the size of houses in the 1970s for an average family of 4, today those houses are up to 3 times bigger with an average family size of 2 or even 1 person. So those expectations are also supporting houses being more important than koalas. Yeah, it's a cultural mindset. Terrific.
I also think what you were just saying, Michelle, about the houses is about this. It's an attitude of the space is mine, not the space is to be shared.
Yes.
And that also occurs in the whole idea of travel. Like the car is mine, and the basically avoiding the use of shared transport and public transport and things like that.
Yeah, and it's all cultural. You know, it's what we expect. And a couple of weeks ago, as part of Earth Laws Month, myself and 2 Indigenous colleagues, Mary Graham and Ross Williams, we had a topic, an evening of discussion called Great Expectations, and we crossed out great and we put medium expectations, how we can demand less from Mother Earth. And it really is that idea of moderate prosperity instead of, yeah. So there's a lot of interesting issues there. And yeah, just spend the next few days when you're out and about, have a look. When you start looking at the world this way, it gets very, it never stops. I'm always looking at things going, oh, why didn't they plan for this and that? Why aren't there connectivity? You know, what have they done? Why have they concreted that stream? You know, and there's all these different activities happening where people are trying to reclaim the living world. There's a lovely thing called daylighting, where they actually tear up the concrete. You know, they've turned a lot of streams and creeks into basically sewer canals, just these horrible things. And they pull up the concrete, they restore the vegetation, it absorbs water more, it attracts more plants, bees and birds, the fish come back. So there's lots of good things we can do. Anyway, I will continue with my little prezzo. But
and Michelle, just before you start, if everyone else wouldn't mind putting themselves on mute while just while you're presenting, that'd be great. Because otherwise all the other noises are coming through on the recording. Thanks,
if you hear a
Michelle.
strange chewing noise, do let me know. I've got a dog who's decided to park herself next to me with her favourite chewy bone.
I don't know.
She's the other
that
dog.
could be the noises, but that's all right. We'll know. We'll be able to say to people when they listen to the recording, leave your dog there. If you've lost it,
she's the other dog. Yeah, she's
Thanks.
trying to, yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, lovelies. All right, I'll just press all the buttons again. But I think it's nice to interrupt my monologuing with a bit of a chat. Hang on, I've lost myself. And there we are. Okay, so we're talking about the theory of Earth jurisprudence, the great work. Yes, and so the impact of these ideas, I often say that the systems we have today are the natural outcome of 500 years of colonial invasion of other places holding these ideas, but also many thousands of years of separation ideas. So what is AILA doing about some of this? Well, we're very interested in the issues. We don't feel like we have any major solutions, but we're engaging in lots of educative work, helping people think about things differently. And as Thomas Berry identified, law, economics, education, religion, what we do is we focus on law, economics, education, promoting Indigenous knowledge and helping that cross-cultural understanding. And rather than critique religion, because we feel that's something that's very deeply personal, we focus on the power of the human spirit through creativity and arts and eco-spirituality. Love, really, love, fun, and creativity. So if I had to point to 5 core sort of areas of our work, that would probably be the pie. So let me talk briefly about what we've been looking at inside the space of law. And then I'll talk about economics, very brief chat about education. Actually, I think I go the other way. Anyway, each slide will remind me what I'm talking about. So law, why is law a problem? Well, if you look over here, this is a very, very brief snapshot. The current Western legal system sees human laws as the highest authority. Since the Enlightenment and secularization, most legal systems don't speak of God, but nor do they connect with nature. They really see human beings as the be-all and end-all. That's fine for some things, but there's a great example. Cormac Cullinan in his book Wild Law talks about how one year in the European Union, they set a fishing quota for a particular species of fish. And the quota they set was higher than the actual number of known fish left. It's just a great example of humans going, this is the law, this is what we'll do. And Mother Nature saying, well, actually, you're completely disconnected. You're not paying attention. The other important thing to know about Western law is that, and this is a hard one to get your head around for a lot of people, nature is absolutely nothing but human property. So think about that. Whether it's a national park, a piece of human property that's protected, or whether it's a wombat, a native species that is protected in some situations, or whether it's a cow, which is a living being that is seen as absolutely property because many people eat them, or whether it's a beautiful bubbling brook. These entities in nature, these members of the earth community, if you were to put the glasses over your eyes of Western law, all you would see are people and big odd shaped things that are corporations. They are subjects of the law, but the rest of the living world is rendered into small cardboard boxes broken up into bits of property. So isn't that interesting? Imagine looking across a vast forest and then putting the lens of the law, and it's just people and corporations and their property. And it's very important to hold that idea because some of the work we do challenges those ideas and helps people think about that. And so the same thing, rights for humans, our legal system only recognizes human beings and corporations and occasionally ships. Our legal system has for hundreds of years absolutely supported a growth ideology to the extent that, you know, after the Second World War, when they were returning soldiers, and after the First World War too, our legal system said you can have this land so long as you develop it. And they would actually say, if you don't clear it, and if you don't have, you know, strange feral animals eating up the world here, we'll take the land back off you because we want to see growth and development. So our system has been built on this very deliberate idea of you must use up the place to show progress. Now, interestingly, earth jurisprudence is a nice way to sort of really contemplate what our legal system's up to, because it argues there is a great law. The laws of the living world, the natural world, are higher than humans. The great laws, as Thomas Berry calls them, are primary, and human laws are secondary. We fit within that system. Nature is not a collection of objects. It's an interconnected community of subjects. It's an earth community. Berry talks about the rights of nature, and many other folks inside the earth jurisprudence movement look at the importance of understanding ecological limits. And there's a lot of more we could talk about. But what I just want to show you is this very exciting diagram. It's this umbrella. I did not draw it. I plucked it off the icons, but I always laugh at it because it's such a terrible image. But it's useful. As I mentioned before, earth jurisprudence is now part of a family of emerging laws in the Western world that are trying to grapple with what ecocentrism and earth-centered protection is all about. So earth jurisprudence, coined by Thomas Berry. You have ecocide, which is the people pushing for the recognition that large-scale damage to the environment should be a crime. It's not at the moment. Ecological law is another framing. Rights of nature is a very active movement. There are more than 12 places around the world that now have rights of nature laws, trying to say Western law treats nature like property. We're going to change that by recognizing that nature has rights-bearing status. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff buried deep in these concepts. And in Australia, the other side of this umbrella term of earth laws that Westerners talk about includes Indigenous first laws. So their legal system that existed prior to British colonisation, and that continues today. And what Mary Graham talks about, the relationist ethos and the laws of obligation. Now, Aboriginal people don't see these as earth laws. Some may talk about it now like earth laws because it fits within what other people say, but these are elements of the legal system that is, well, one of the oldest legal systems in the world. So earth laws, lots of interesting things happening. The Australian Earth Laws Alliance, in our work, we support people through training and education and workshops. We recently started a professional development course, an 8-week course that helps people think differently and bring these ideas into their own work. We have community groups advocating for an Aussie version of rights of nature. The Blue Mountains local councils grappling with this idea. We have some friends at the Hawkesbury Nepean River system that we're going to be doing workshops with as Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members want to engage with this idea of recognising the river as a living entity. They no longer want to accept that their beautiful river is property. And what this is going to look like over time, I have no idea. But I think what's exciting is when Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in this country work together, they're going to be building a very different looking future law. And I personally find that very encouraging. So what about politics? I have to say, until the federal government election this year showed some kind of promise with the new Labor government indicating it would respond to climate change, we sort of stayed out of what I would call typical campaigning work or political advocacy. We figured, and especially 10 years ago, the kind of earth-centered work we were interested in, the governments of the day were definitely not interested in. I mean, if they were trying to axe the Climate Council, what were they going to make of people like us advocating for the rights of nature and Indigenous first laws? But I will say that we've been drawn into chatting to politicians over the last 2 years, because since COVID, for some reason, the light bulb went on for a lot of people about the really important systems change work that does have to happen. So we've chatted to several local councils. I've been approached by people connected to and some politicians to find out a little bit more about our work, but I think they still think we're a bit radical. But at the end of the day, I would say that the Australian political system is very well built for the 19th century. I think it's got a long way to go. And we're going to continue our work working with community groups who are leading the way in innovative thinking, working in partnership with Indigenous friends, scientists, local leaders, often politicians working with their own, of their own steam, but we're not really going to go to bat and be talking to federal politicians about stuff just yet. But next year, when we roll out the Green Prints program, we'll be able to show them really positive examples of how they could do things differently. And I just wanted to mention this map. So just a reminder that in 1788, when the Brits came to Australia, they had already scattered their colonies across the planet. And when I harp on about colonization, please don't feel like I'm being mean to my own culture or my own peoples. The reality is, though, that from 1599 onwards and 1601, when the Dutch East India and British East India companies were formed to go forth and exploit the rest of the world, and this part of the world started to take over the rest of the world. And it took many of their core ideas with them, including state-sanctioned violence, human-centered culture, a certain way of thinking about the law, and certain ways of thinking about economics and growth and extractivism. And when I talk about colonization, it's those 500 years of that kind of thinking. And what's exciting is if you think back to the umbrella of earth laws, it really does represent, and it has done for 10 years at least, if not much longer, the flowers and the vines of life trying to creep back through the cracks in the concrete of colonization. Colonization spread across diverse cultures, diverse places with very set ideas. And those ideas are starting to break down properly because of the failure of some of those systems. So I'm really interested in what happens next. I don't wish for bad things to happen. I wish for good things to happen, but I do want to see some change. So quickly back to Ayla's little pie chart of work, I guess you could call it. Indigenous knowledge, as I said before, the tree of inspiration for Ayla, a massive branch of that is Indigenous knowledge systems. And what I want to mention is one of the reasons that myself and 2 Indigenous elders created Future Dreaming is really to offer a unique space to, and our little tagline is sharing knowledge. And what we mean is sharing ecological knowledge to build a better future for all of us. And we hold workshops and online discussions, and it's really a beautiful space. We talk about culture, we talk about Indigenous ways, practical ways of caring for country. We critique some of the systems of the West, but also point to the good things that are happening. So for Ayla, working in solidarity with Indigenous friends here on this continent is a privilege, an honour. It's hard work. Cross-cultural work is, riddled with difficulties and confronting issues and people from all walks of life very angry about the past, scared about the future. And we hope that we play a small role in yarning up and talking to people about how we care for country together. What have I got next? Oh yeah, I just put the websites there. We're also helping Regen Songlines. It's a network of sort of led by about 6 or 8 Indigenous leaders, including Mary Graham, Tyson Yunkel Porter, who wrote Sand Talk, Anne Polina from the Fitzroy Kimberley region, and lots of other great people. And we're sort of trying to hold online events a couple of times a year to share their wisdom in a way that is accessible for anyone. This is the wonderful Mary Graham, and I've already mentioned her work, and because of time, you know, I could talk all night about Mary, but if you're interested, please Google Mary Graham, the Relationist Ethos. You'll find YouTube clips. If you're interested, look on the Future Dreaming website. I had one of our interns collate all of Mary's many articles, written chapters, YouTube clips and talks and things, so you can really get a good access to her info. And so we're working on a book together called Future Law. What would Australia look like if it was built on the relationist ethos? And it's a mishmash of a really, really important collation of all of her work is part 1. And then part 2 is Mary and I sit at her house with coffee, contemplating what a better future could look like, a fairer one for humans and an ecologically just one for everybody. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And I'll let you explore Mary's work. Now, economics. When I was invited to speak with you, economics was in the topic. So I thought, all right, I'm going to bring together some of the slides that poor Margaret's already heard some of this, but I thought it's a really excellent way to track the emerging thinking in Western societies, because the breaking down of the ideas of growth economics is one of the toughest things we're ever going to try to do, but there's an absolute flourishing of different economic ideas and movements and communities. So I'll talk to you briefly about them, and then we'll talk a bit more about the arts as well. I'll just have a little drink. All righty, so economics. The old economy is built on, well, let's think about the Industrial Revolution. So from the 1750s on, what we saw was rural communities literally start to fiddle with and invent slightly better ways to do stuff like weaving, developing textiles, machinery for farming. And what we saw was this kind of explosion of the use of fossil fuels, coal in particular, very easy to access in Britain. And really nifty people designing cool things to make life more productive. Unfortunately, the economy was very quickly taken over by kind of collective ideas about, if I own it, it's my wealth, and you're just a wage labourer, then you can be working. And we saw the increase in pollution, unjust conditions for workers, a really massive increase in the mechanisation of everything. And so today, if people talk about the old economy, they're talking about fossil fuels, large-scale extractivism, and very unjust structures, very hierarchical. You know, people often say the 1%, and that's because there's something like 20, or is it 11 trillionaires. Obviously, they earn more than 60% of the rest of the entire global population put together. So we've got some really weird and uneven ways of thinking about our economy at the moment. And the challenge ahead, the kinds of things that many people are grappling with, is how do we live within our limits? So in a minute, I'm just going to run quickly through some of these different ideas, and all of them are fantastic and exciting, and we'll see what happens. So the economy, you know, what is it exactly, and what has it got to do with caring for our home? At the end of the day, the economy is meant to be about how we make and distribute the things we need to live. It's that simple. But what we've seen is this merging of political ideas and cultural mindsets to develop these growth economy ideas. And I can't stress enough how absolutely ingrained it is in the Australian system, the US, anywhere in Europe, but also due to globalization and colonization. Pretty much most countries on earth now are caught up and interlinked through the international global system. I won't talk too much about this stuff, but what I wanted to mention is a lot of people point to neoliberalism as a reason for things getting really bad in the 1980s. Neoliberalism is an idea that the only thing that's important is the free market, and the free market will decide how things should be distributed, and that will work for our society. And we should have no government interference, meaning no complaints from anybody, just let the free market decide how we do things. This has not ended well. And if you remember the Great Acceleration, it continues today. People are using too much. Most people are not having enough of those resources, but small groups of elite are very, very wealthy. But challenging this idea of growth economics has been around sort of officially since the early 1970s. There's been a lot of arguments about the limits to growth. And that has combined with, in the 1970s, the emergence of these early ideas called steady state economics. The idea that people like Herman Daly and Donella Meadows through the Club of Rome said that basically planet Earth is a finite system floating in the inkiness of space. And whatever we do here, we can't escape from, and we can't just keep eating it up. You know, we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. Steady state economics led to ecological economics, which then sort of exploded all over the place in lots of different ideas. But at the end of the day, did governments pick it up? No. They continued with GDP and growth economics, and they still do today. What's happened in the 21st century is we've had some cool ideas like donut economics, and Kate Raworth's work has really taken off around the Western world, or, you know, industrialized societies. A lot of communities are picking up on donut economics. And by what she did here was take current Earth system science by our wonderful Aussie scientists like Will Steffen and others in Europe, where they said, well, thanks to NASA and science and technology and satellites, for the first time in human existence, we can actually almost quantify what this whole planet needs to function as a healthy system. And I won't go into too much of that. If you don't know much about it and you're interested, if you Google planetary boundaries, you'll find it. It came out an article in 2009, and it's really, really groundbreaking for people who need to be reminded that we live on a finite planet. The scary thing is they talk about these boundaries as if we could keep them all into a healthy space, we'd have a healthy planet and a healthy way to live. But we've already busted through 4, and I hear just this week that they think we may have crossed the 5th boundary. Climate is one of them. You know, we've pushed through by changing the way our climate works. We're using too much water. We've cleared too much land. We've dumped too much nitrogen. It's very bloody depressing. And we can save that conversation for later too. But what Kate Raworth did, which is really interesting, is she built on the shoulders of the steady staters and said, well, actually, we should change our economic system so that we're not focused on growth, but what we're trying to do is live within these planetary boundaries, but ensure that folks have the social foundation so that everyone has enough without wrecking the joint. But you'll see here that they keep talking about this safe and just space for humanity. And what I wanted to do I have it here? Oh, I normally have an image after it. I redesigned it, and I called it the Aussie donut. And it actually has under here, it's got bio-regional foundations and caring for country. And inside we call it a safe space for all of the Earth community. And I should have this slide because it's my example to you of how Ayla is involved in helping people think differently, which is, yes, she's kind of on the right track. But if we really want to stop growth economics wrecking the joint, we have to be thinking about everybody, all life, all of creation on this planet. So that's what our image is. So a lot of the work that Ayla does, and we're going to jump across these are ways that the donut economic stuff helps people in cities do things. But what I wanted to say is that there are lots and lots of alternative economic theories. Donut economics is a bit newer, but there's ideas like the well-being economy. You might have heard that the Australian federal government plans to have a well-being budget. New Zealand's had a well-being budget for a couple of years. They're trying to move away from just focusing on what we sell and make, which is GDP, to are people happy? Are they getting health and education? It's a really good first step, but many of our governments aren't very good at this stuff, and they're still in the pocket of the big fossil fuel, old economy vested interests. But the good thing is, with alternate economic ideas comes exploration and experimentation. Community economics is another fabulous one. I don't think we really have time for me to wax lyrical because I do want to talk about green prints. But community economics says, you know what? The current growth economy kind of says this is what an economy is: commodity markets, capitalism, and wage labor. Community and diverse economies are saying, actually, no, everything we do, the way we care for our elderly, the way we support each other, the way we act as parents, the housework we do, the not-for-profit and volunteer work we do, blah, blah, blah. There's so much more to the day-to-day of our living economy. And what I wanted to mention is that, as you know, I was one of the folks who created the New Economy Network Australia. And one of the reasons we did that was so we could create a platform for people to get access to all these cool ideas, because the solutions are all around us. They really are. And one of the things that encourages me profoundly about the work we do is the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around Australia already involved in community economies. Looking at community purchasing of renewable energy, or looking at community food gardens, or trying to find co-housing and collaborative housing. So Nina is a really important part of Ayla's work, because what we want to do in these elements is to show folks that we can have a society that focuses on the health of the living world and the health of human beings, all interconnected. And there are very viable ways to do that, and to not just have this growth economics that supports elitist and anti-planetary ways of being. I won't go into that. So they're the key elements. And what I wanted to show you now, and I'm not sure, do we need a little break? Because I feel like I've been talking at you for some time.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, let's do that.
If we just had a little break.
Yeah. How long would you like, Anne?
Maybe 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll see you all back here in 5. I'm going to fill up my glass of water. And when you come back, I'm going to show you how we've been working to bring lots of cool ideas together into a systems change approach. Thank you, everyone.
You
Oh, well
that again.
done.
Yeah, we're right again. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. I hope you had a lovely quick break. So we've talked about these different elements within the work of Ayla. And when it comes back to the topic of today's talk, you know, how can legal, political and economic systems care for the living world or protect our ecosystems? Any one of our elements, the law, politics, economics, education, which I didn't talk much about, I apologize, we might come back to it. Any one of these elements can be profoundly shifted and changed to help connect people more fully to the living world and to change the way that we look after or destroy the planet. One of the reasons I dreamt up green prints about 6 years ago, wow, longer than that now, was that I was looking at across all these different systems and thinking, what we're asked the most by community groups is, how do we work to bring ourselves, our communities together fully to support the living world? And how could we make the kinds of systems change we want to make? And so one of the reasons that Green Prints exists is because I was thinking about all the different stuff that I had done across my own work life, and all these cool, wonderful things like Indigenous people caring for land, scientists researching butterflies, people trying to change this system, people trying to change the economy, and many people doing quite well in place, trying to change all of it at once. Well, all we wanted to do with Green Prints was show people a bit of a step-by-step way to bring good ideas together and to bring more people into place to start from the care of the earth and work their way out to these other systems that really are just human created. So let me tell you a bit about Green Prints, and then we'll have time. I should only be another 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Is that okay, Anne?
Fine. Michelle,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Okay, because that will still give us half an hour for chats if people
Yeah,
want to
great.
talk.
Thanks.
So let's come back to that image of shifting from the ideas on the left, the ideas that humans are more important than everything else, and that all other species and things are lesser than us. And so, as I was mentioning before, one of the reasons Ayla auspiced the New Economy was so that the New Economy Network was so that we could bring economic ideas, the things that serious politicians take very importantly, but connect them into the earth-centered work that we were doing so that we could look across systems. Oh, there's the proper donut. So this is the image that we created. I hope you love it as much as I do. Living space for the whole earth community. And you'll see that I made sure it was Aussie. So it's got beetles and frogs, Tassie devil, koala. And this, for those people who've already engaged in donut economics, this idea, and you'll see the Green Prints logo down here, helps them think a bit differently about what we're talking about. That if we just focus on human interests inside ecological limits, you will end up with a slightly different outcome. All right, so Green Prints. This is a beautiful image that I tortured a nice artist to draw for me. I kept drawing it in pencil and asking them to do it because I loved their style. And obviously the image represents a very positive, vibrant, healthy earth community with people and renewable energy and lots of happy, flourishing animals. So the Green Prints story is all about creating a practical pathway to bring the good stuff together so that individuals, communities, organizations can create the kinds of change they want, focusing on the unique ecological places and communities they're part of to support and respect the living world. I'll jump across that one. So the Green Prints vision is trying to think about how we can unpick the systems we have to build more regenerative human societies that thrive within ecological limits and the new terms are nature positive. So not just minimizing harm, but actually contributing back and supporting the living world in all of our endeavors. So one way to think about this vision is to strip back the political boundaries, and the big, long, straight lines across Australia were brought to us by the older white men of the British Empire. They were fundamentally drawn by folks colonizing to use up the place. And I often tell the story that if you look at the history of South Australia, as one example, it was literally carved up like a real estate special sale. It was handed over to a corporation to actually manage the sale of land in South Australia. And this is while Aboriginal people were still living there. So there's connectivity between political boundaries, political power, and corporate power, very powerful. So if we take away those boundaries for a moment and focus on the living world, has anyone seen this map before? Do you know what it is?
Everyone's probably on mute, so not able to answer you. So,
well,
I certainly haven't. If anyone has, you might want to unmute yourself and tell
Looks
us.
like the Indigenous nations.
it does, doesn't it? But you know, it's not.
Mm.
This is what we call the bioregional map of Australia. Western scientists, using from the geology up, using a tool or, mechanisms for classifying land, have articulated or have said there's 89 main bioregions in Australia. But doesn't it look like the Aboriginal map of Australia? When you break, so there's 89 bioregions. So this is what Western scientists tell us the Australian continent is made up of. And what does that mean? It means that if you look at the geology, the soils, the microclimates, and the vegetation of a place, literally from the ground up, this is how Mother Nature is telling you she's different from place to place. So what's interesting is Aboriginal people obviously worked this out a long time ago because they had rainforest people and rainforest laws. So they made the laws that helped them live in their place forever. And you had desert laws for desert people. And you had, cold country laws for cold country people. And I kind of love this image because it takes away the human boundaries and says, even from Western science points of view, when we look at what Mother Earth is telling us, she's made up of a patchwork quilt of different places, supporting different kinds of life. And I think it's beautiful. So our vision inside Greenprints is to help people start connecting first, not to what a human vision is for a place, but what the place actually is. And that might seem really obvious if you're involved in land care or you love your local gardens. But remember that our society was built on the foundation of extractivism, expansionism, elitism. And again, I'm not even bagging it out. It's a fact. When they came to Australia, they didn't say, let's explore all the different regions. It was, where can we grow food? How can we take all this scrappy trees and forests out so that we can build on it? And how do we do what we want to do? And Greenprints is a call to go back to basics. And this is really a first and foremost aimed at non-Indigenous people, because obviously Aboriginal people have their own laws, their own systems. However, we have found that this resonates with Indigenous people because they can use the Greenprints approach to validate to other Westerners why caring for country is good for the economy. Okay, so there's the Aboriginal map of Australia. That's the bioregional map. And I was going to say, they actually broke the bioregions down into 419 sub-regions, and it actually looks more like the Aboriginal map even. So it's beautiful. So our vision is really thinking about place and country first and trying to rearrange what humans get up to. But how do we get there? How can industrialized societies actually shift from being pro-growth to being more relationist and regenerative and live within our limits? And very importantly, how do we avoid greenwashed sustainability approaches? And by that, I mean the corporate takeover of very good ideas and watering them down to the extent that they look like they're doing great things, but they're really not. In fact, they're often continuing to do large-scale extractivism. So before I talk a bit more about Greenprints and the basic steps we set up to help people stay sane through the complex issues, I love this quote from George Box: all models are wrong, some are useful. So the most that we hope for is that Greenprints turns out to be of use to people as they do it themselves, but we all work together in solidarity to try to work through the steps. So I'll move through some of the basic stuff quickly so I can show you a little bit more about who's involved and what we're up to next year. So Greenprints provides a practical step-by-step approach to helping people understand the big picture and the small details of how to transform societies within their unique place. We do try to demystify and connect lots of different concepts. That's why it took me several years, because I did it mostly on my own until I had a few volunteers come in and help me, just mapping out all the different ways that people were trying to do good things across sustainability. So Greenprints is both a process. It's these step-by-step ways of going, okay, what if we looked at this stuff now? And what if we understand these things now? And then next we'll pull apart this and understand what the economy could look like, etc. But Greenprints is also, at the end of the day, an output. It's all about creating viable alternatives to business as usual, meaning If we're looking across a small catchment area or a bioregion, what will it look like if we keep building these houses the way we've always built them? You know, if houses are more important than koalas, exactly which year is it that we've run out of everything and there's nothing but houses? If we do things differently, what would that scenario look like? And shockingly, for all our cleverness in Australian and other societies, we don't tend to do this. Businesses do an analysis of what business success will be for an individual enterprise. Governments set out big budgets, but they very rarely do the long-term sustainability planning that they really should do. So this is about communities taking a lot of this stuff on themselves and trying to work out a sensible story for, hey, if we're in the Sunshine Coast and we keep taking out all the forests to put in the houses, we're going to have nothing left. But what about if we did it this way over here? We've got the maps, we've got the tools, we've done the economic analysis, we know the biodiversity. That's our goal in Greenprints, is to empower people to really understand a better direction and then encourage people to go on that better direction. Because right now, people are working in small pockets, single issue by single issue. So Greenprints is offering a way for us to co-create, and by that work together, to challenge the ideas of this worldview that nature's property, to focus on earth-centeredness, to move away from a growth-centered economic system to something more like steady state or donut economics. And this is something that I can talk more about if you're really interested, but not everyone is. As someone with a legal training or a Western law background, ultimately Greenprints will be advocating for turning the entire legal system on its head. And instead of making local councils and local communities last in priority of order, they come first. And we put the developers last and the mining companies last. Now, this is not an idea that's going to get traction straight away, but we're going to show bioregion by bioregion what positive scenarios can look like. And then there's a whole bunch of processes about deliberative democracy and participation, citizens' assemblies. All right, so that's all flash, that's all big theory, but what are these lovely steps? So how do we get there to the pretty future with the flourishing things from here? And I'm not kidding you. I spent, out of the 6 years developing all this stuff, it took me about a year to just narrow down some basic steps. And look, they could change over time. None of this stuff is set in concrete, but it really helps people to stay sane amidst a flurry of options and things that could be done. So what I will do, bear with me, to show you the steps. First, I actually want to show you who's doing stuff. So what we've got, and next year we're doing our Greenprints Adventure, where folks in Perth, Margaret River, Nowra, Sydney, far north Queensland, and pockets of communities throughout southeast Queensland and Adelaide, maybe Tassie. We're all going on an adventure together, where for the first 3 or 4 months of next year, we'll be working online every month and going back into our communities, gathering info and connecting with people and bringing people together around the chunks and the steps within Greenprints. So what are these steps? Well, and again, I'm just going to touch on them so you know a little bit about this. And if you want to know more, you can come along to our info sessions in October or read the website, which is very early development. We want people to not start here with human activities. We don't want them starting with their vision for a better future. Or if they do, we want them to come back and start here. Think differently. Define the ecological boundaries of your project, whether it's your bioregion or your ecosystem or your local catchment. We want you to dig deep and understand your ecological foundations, then track what we've been up to as human beings in this place and what the past and the present now look like, because we're going to be thinking about what the future is going to look like. We can use the ecological footprint method to do a health check. And the simple answer is most cities and towns in Australia are in overshoot. They are using more resources than they can possibly ever generate themselves or replenish. But we can change that. And then we develop scenarios for change. And it seems so logical and so simple, but at the moment, we don't have these big systems bringing all of this together. And it takes a lot of work to do the research. We've started these processes in 3 communities. It's a big job, could take a year or 2 or 3 just to get the story together. But more importantly is the process of bringing people into that work, bringing the historical societies, the local Indigenous groups, the local scientists, the kids, the students, the mums, the dads, the Rotary clubs, as many folks as possible. Because then, of course, once we look at different scenarios for our place, who makes a decision about what we want to bang the drum for? There is no right or wrong answer, but we do have an emphasis both at the beginning and at the end and all the way through about who's in the room, who's involved in this process, who can we actively invite in. So then we would develop action plans and then start to implement. And the thing I wanted to put the donut here, because the economic stuff, which everyone focuses on first, is really in the middle of the Green Prince process. And there's a feedback loop, because let's imagine communities do this and they've actually started to map, well, you know what? We used to have all of these beautiful rainforests that cared and looked after the waterways, and now they've been cleared for agriculture. And we identify, how do we change the agricultural practices to then restore the rivers? But then how do we keep looking after the place, and how do we keep checking in on things? So that's why it's an ongoing loop. And I was going to say, do excuse me, I'm getting over a really nasty thing that doesn't go away. When you think about Green Prince at that very simple level, and under each point, there's lots of work. Excuse me. I think this is Mother Nature saying, stop talking, Michelle. When you look at the Laudato Si responses, what's really nifty is that we have actually mapped them into Green Prince. Just excuse me. So I hope that that makes sense. It might seem simplistic, or it might seem a bit messy. It's both, but it's got a lot of complexity under it. And for anyone who's interested in connecting integral ecology to the Green Prince approach, we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible, but it's very exciting. Excuse me. I'm actually mostly finished. The only other thing I wanted to share with you is that Green Prince fits within some very typical systems change work. None of it's rocket science. We haven't invented anything amazing. We're just trying to communicate how all the good things can come together, and we can do this work.
This might be a sign it's almost time for you to
yes, I think it is. I'm going to wrap up.
Torturous for you.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to wrap up here. So I just wanted to
great.
say that Green Prince is all about bringing. So as I said, I'll just say here, there is no snail of destiny. It's not a neat, simple process. You don't do one step, then the next step. You try to gather clumps of info, and every time you do stuff, you bring more and more people in, so that eventually we have a workbook that shows a simple view of where we're going in our community. And everyone that we've tested this on agrees that that's very useful, because governments may have local council plans, strategies, but they're not engaging with ecological limits. They're not engaging in the reality of what we're facing. So all I wanted to say to wrap up is that Earth-centered economics is a part of the Green Prince project in here. How we think about Earth-centered law is very interesting, because it actually fits in down in the transition plans, because you know why? We believe that the legal system that was plonked on top of this continent, which is top down, based on political boundaries, needs to change to be more sensitive, so that we return to something like rainforest people having rainforest laws, desert people having desert laws, more appropriate legal structures to support caring for country in our various bioregions. And on that note, I'm going to stop. And maybe you could gather your thoughts and ask some questions while
I'm actually wondering to allow Michelle to get a voice there. I'm going to start there. There could be people that would just like to make a comment rather than a question in terms of what you've been listening to and watching. And just unmute yourself when you're ready to talk. And if you put your hand up, I'll be able to put you up on speaker view, so we'll be able to hear and see you better. So a comment or anything from anybody from what you've been saying, and gathering your questions. Well, now Michelle started to get her voice back. There could be some other people. There could be some people who'd like to ask a question.
I see Velda has her electronic hand up.
Oh, good on her. And good on you, Val. Go for it, Valda.
You're still on mute, Velda, if you did want to chat.
Just going to say, I heard you talk years ago when you came down to Parramatta to give us a talk, and just think you've done so much work since then, so much development, and it was just wonderful listening to you. And it's a very big program, and I loved your little snails at the end that somehow you've got to go step by step, and wherever you thought you were going to end up may not be where you're going to end up, but it's just wonderful, that sharing of ideas. Michelle, thank you. Helped me a
Thank
lot.
you. That's lovely feedback. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Val.
I think I've talked them all into a trance, Anne.
Yeah.
Margaret and Sue have their hands up.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. It's unbelievable stuff. I mean, it's impossible to do justice to all the work that you've done in such a short amount of time. But I guess what it seems to have done for me is, apart from the fact that we've got all the information now we'll have it on our website, so we can all go back and look again if there's some particular thing you want to follow up. I think, like other people, that we're, especially over the last few years, when we seem to be hearing all the bad news around our global situation. And I mean, the media love the bad news, I suppose, but it's overwhelming though when you feel it's so much, we're overshooting so much. Will we ever be able to survive? The children coming after us be able to survive? They're when I get into that sort of feeling. So what you've been presenting to me is, I think, for the first time, somewhere who's trying to put together a process, small as it seems to be and slow, snail-like that it will be. I don't know of any other groups or any other system trying to do this, to give us some hope that there is a way that we won't overshoot completely, and that's the end of everything.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Margaret, very much. I would certainly, with genuine humility, say there are a gazillion groups out there trying to do good things, but they're not always looking across the whole landscape. They might be focusing on climate, which they must, because we have to respond to climate change, or they're looking at fire management, or they're focused on economics or community gardens. So I think in a way our work honors their work by saying there's tons of terrific positive stuff out there. Maybe we could speed up joining up the dots and doing good things. So I certainly think there's a lot of great folks out there doing work that gives me optimism. But certainly if we give you optimism, then that's good, because we are facing some pretty terrible future scenarios. However, we still do have capacity right now to do better things, you know. And like the work of this lovely lady we've been starting to work with, Del Jones, on nature positive design and everything else, she's talking about, you know, they've crunched the numbers. If people literally go crazy and plant verges, plant trees, restore their local creeks, particularly in cities, you're going to not balance out, but really draw down carbon. You're going to take away the heat spots in your city. You're going to improve the water absorption in your catchments. You can, you know, you can positively influence some of the flooding zones and the fire zones. And I think there's a lot more that we can do than you will ever come across on mainstream TV, because you're right, they love the doom and gloom, and that's not cool. That's just not cool.
Thanks, Michelle. Sue, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, no, Michelle, I have shared that I just love everything you're doing. So that's my comment. But I am aware that Blue Mountains Council is one of those councils that has put the rights of nature into their planning laws. And you mentioned, I think you've been a friend to make that happen. I maybe just want to share with others that when I talk to my local council, I always ask them why haven't they done that for their planning laws. So I think that's a little thing we can all do, is to and now that we've heard.
What do they say, Sue? I'm curious. When you say it to them, what do they say?
So many of you know I live in the Hills Council, which Michelle is really sad, but you got to actually work. You got to make where you live the place you want to be. And they've only just said that they'll do an acknowledgement of country before a meeting. Look at your voice. Look at that.
Wow.
Look at that. And
Yes.
so I am part of getting that to change. So
Good on you.
yeah. So when I talk about you need to follow Blue Mountains Council, the planners say yes, they would love to do that, but they need that voted out. And I won't keep going, but we did get one Greens councillor on. So, but it's a slow journey. But I did want to just share with everybody, you can ask those questions. And I know I've got a long journey at the Hills, but Parramatta Council, I know just, having these conversations helps. But the question, I did have a question, Michelle. You mentioned some communities and that you're going to be working with Lithgow. I'm so interested to just maybe get a sense of what that looks like, and if we could, as a community, is there a way we can, is that something we could model somewhere else? So to me, it's that community green prints, and how do we do it, or how do we be involved in it, maybe? Yeah,
absolutely. So thank you for the question. And good on you for asking your council, anything that helps them step forward. And I should mention that we're a bit behind. We're actually going to launch a little thing called the Ecocentric Toolkit. And we hope to have in it, and we'll share it with everyone as a draft, because we actually want people's input and go, oh, no, I wouldn't use this, but I'd like to have this. And it will be a bunch of things that you can, like, you'll look at it and go, I'm an individual and I want to talk to my council. Well, here's some stuff about, the law of obligation, rights of nature, ecocide, whatever. So I'll send it to you, and when it's in a draft form, right. And if you can share it with your networks, everybody, we genuinely want, what might be useful. And you might then have a template to go to your council and go, did you know that to be earth-centered or ecocentric, other people are doing this, this, and this? What are you doing? I don't know. But
that'll be a fabulous follow-up from because we'll put your talk onto our website. It'll be a fabulous follow-up for people from that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. And we're genuine when we say we'll knock out a draft, but tell us what you think would be useful, because we don't know everything and we never pretend that we do. We're good at collating cool ideas and helping people with what they need. But Sue, to your question, the Lithgow project is really cool. So it was really the brainchild of a number of people, particularly some folks at the University of Western Sydney, where they put in a big grant proposal to one of the Resilience Bushfire Foundation funds. And I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it exactly. And because Louise Crabtree Hayes, who's at the uni, knew about green prints, she immediately got that it could be a useful, I think of it as scaffolding, where you can sort of hold it in the background and your arts project can fit in here, and maybe we can get the science guys to do this bit and tell the whole story. So when they got the funding, they've got a hub there run by, I think her name's Deborah Ma. No, sorry, late in the day, brain not working. They are doing all these cool projects. It's a really exciting project. So they're doing lots of awesome things like science for turtles, and they're doing tradie projects around economic change and transformation. And so they have written the Green Prints project, a Green Prints approach, into their own project. And we're looking at ways that we can help with measuring and looking at stuff, but also initiating projects. So one of the things you might be interested in if you're in that general region is at the end of November, we're having a couple of days New Economy Symposium. And this is a way, we call them a regional gathering, where you get folks in a town or a place to come together to really focus on what the economy means to them, what it actually is, the real economy. get local champions talking about what's important for their region. And we weave in via the green print stuff a little bit of earth-centeredness. And you also then invite councillors, people from the local Chamber of Commerce to talk about their work. But mostly it's so they'll then listen to the community about what they think is important. And so Lithgow is a very interesting project. And I think if you're interested, perhaps send a note to Anne, and I will try to find, I'm sure they've got a mailing list. I'm only one of many, many players, and it's led by their hub. And it's all credit to the Uni of Western Sydney for doing this remarkable work, and we're excited to be part of it.
Right.
So see what happens.
Any more questions or comments at this stage? Thanks, Mark. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Just to what extent, in you doing the green print activity, regional sort of thing, what's the smallest area or the largest area in which you sort of, this thing will work?
It's really an experiment, Margaret. Yeah, look, individuals can definitely join and just be part of the discussions throughout 2023. You're very welcome to do that so that you can be thinking about stuff or engaging with others. We do see it as a collective activity. So let me think for a minute. So here at Regen Brisbane is a growing community group that we've connected with. Well, we've helped create, but we're connecting to it. They want to look across the Brisbane catchment, but also connect to others in the Southeast Queensland region. Now that's massive, but at the same time, we've got one tiny community in far north Queensland who wants to have a look. And I think it will literally be, you know, up in the, well, you might not know, in the Tablelands. It's a very small patch of country, actually. And then you've got folks down in Nowra, and I'm not really sure how they're defining their space. But what we, you know, you could even have a couple of people in an organization start to think beyond the sustainability of just their organization and go, how do we fit into this place? And if we were to join this discussion with other people around Australia, how might we bring others in and see what people want to do? You know, it's not for the faint of heart, and there is no funding. So this is driven by passionate volunteers. So, yeah. I think the biggest scale would be a full bioregion. And I think what we're going to end up with is the little sub-regions or catchments. We're really not that fussy about how people do it. We just want them to start engaging in the reality of, we're going to draw this line using natural boundaries, and we're going to focus on human activities in this place, and we're going to get to know this place properly, and then understand what impact we've had by taking out the trees or flooding by a dam or whatever the impacts have been, local, unique, and then looking at it from there.
Fabulous. Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to ask, Assess would like to say.
Oh, and Brian's got a question too.
Oh, righto, Brian. Sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah, just a comment, just to take it out to a little bigger scale for the moment. We've got 2 people going to the COP15 Biodiversity Conference in Montreal in December, and part of our contribution is an interfaith contribution. So there was a big network already working for that. So they're going to have interfaith side events and prayer spaces and things like that.
Excellent.
Montreal. So that kind of dimension too is really helpful, I think, with looking at the global picture for a moment.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, Earth jurisprudence speaks to the fractal nature of life, you know, that we've got the whole planet, we've got eco-regions, we've got bioregions, sub-regions, catchments, you know, so the interconnectivity of all these things really matters, and nothing we do in any way wants to take away from the kind of sectoral approach. Like, we look at biodiversity, great. Challenging the impacts, you know, trying to tackle climate change, great. We're just looking at all of these things place by place so that you can do systems change a little easier by looking at it in a unique place. And interestingly, I was actually with some folks at Sydney Uni last week looking at the new text for the COP15 discussions, and it's yeah, it's really trippy looking at the international level versus the local reality, you know, how universalized it is and how generalized it is. But it's really important to set those bigger goals. Absolutely. Good luck to them.
Yeah.
Oh, and Brian, if you have info about any of those interfaith activities, we'd love to even share that, like promote that. Can I just mention that the Faith Ecology Network is doing, I don't know if any of you are connected to it with Anne Lanyon, but they're doing a little talk next week as part of our Earth Laws Month about their biodiversity, the 10 steps that people of faith can do to care for biodiversity. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah. Great. Is there anyone else? I'll put it all back on gallery view so I can have a better look to see if there's anyone else that wants to say something.
Just one thing.
Yes, Mary?
I just want to say, Michelle, thank you very much. And I just love the way you've connected the whole work of Thomas Berry, the wisdom of Thomas Berry, with all this new growth like Greenprint, you name it, all the different groups. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And Thomas Berry will be looking down upon us.
Oh, I hope so. That's lovely, Mary.
Yeah,
I never got to meet him, but his book, The Great Work, seriously took the chaos of the problems and helped me use it as a framework to keep sane and do good deeds. So yeah, I'm terribly grateful to him and his work. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Val?
Yeah, just want to say that if you wanted an example of someone who's really worked with councils, it's Mari's brother, John Butcher, and they have the what's the name of the river? The Cook River Society. And it's been going for, you probably know about it, do you, Michelle?
No, I don't.
Well, it's been going for years, probably about 15 years, and their aim has been to try to clean up the Cook River. And they have groups that check the water every week and let the council know. They have groups that, they've even got a choir that sings on the bridge. They've got groups that look after the mangroves. So we could send you, if you just looked up Cook's River, it's Cook's River Organisation, isn't it, Mary? Alliance, because we often go to things they run, and they've got a big Indigenous population as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it is absolutely wonderful.
They've joined our waterkeeper groups. So they're one of the waterkeepers in Sydney. Yeah.
Wonderful. The waterkeeper.
They've also got a school program, and I know the Catholic School Kempsey this term has been running the program that they wrote on the Cooks River.
Oh, that's great.
That's really good.
Isn't it wonderful to hear some of the things that are happening around the place? And
there is so much, Anne, like in our work within AILA and the new economy, I am overwhelmed by the number of good stories. If it was just based on community goodwill and effort, we'd be in a great place right now. And that's that extra layer of challenging the economic system that so much of it, there's pushing back at communities. Communities are often doing brilliant work, but then they often can't stop the rolling in of unwanted developments or the bigger picture of extractivism. So, yeah.
Well, the more you talk to groups and enthuse them as you have us, the more the change is going to happen.
Well, it's going to take all of us, but thank you.
Says, Mari, did you want to make a last comment before?
I was just going to say the Strathfield Council has been trying to improve the wetlands. So there's a big wetlands next to the Sydney Olympic Park.
Yep.
And they've been working on that to try and improve it. And I know we walked past today the wetlands in Sydney Olympic Park. And the work, because it's the largest wetlands on the Parramatta River. So there's a lot of work going on to try and improve those wetlands.
Yeah.
And bring the bird. They said it's amazing how the bird life has started to come back.
Yes. That's the wonderful thing. And I'll look them up as well. Look, I am constantly inspired by all of the great on the ground work that folks do, here in Brisbane, you've got the Balimba catchment management groups. They passionately care for their own creeks and waterways. They come together across Brisbane. They try to advise the council on how to do things properly. There is a ton of great work going on. And yeah, I love it. I just love it all. I love the people who care for the rivers and the creatures. Whereas I just sit on Zoom yarning up and talking about ideas. And next week's going to be much more fun for me because we'll get to put the boots on the ground and wander about in a couple of communities in Queensland.
Well, that's great. Radio Sess, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Well, Michelle, you've blown us away with your enthusiasm, your passion, and the enormous amount of information you've given us today. And I suppose for me, a couple of things that jumped out were that the land is the source of the law. That really struck me as it's so important. And all the other points that you gave us and spoke about, the community economics, the health of the earth, the Green Prince points, all of which to me says that you are hearing the cry of the earth.
Oh.
And we hope that we too can spread that message of the cry of the earth, which is so important. So thank you very much for sending yourself hoarse, getting it through all across to us.
That's my fault, not yours.
And thank you on behalf of all the people on the Zoom today, everyone. And wonderful inspiration.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, lovelies. And do keep in touch. If there's any of your community work that you think we should know about, tell us. If there's ever anything we can do to come and share your good work, then yeah, tell us.
That's dangerous. We will.
No, we love it. We live for it.
But thank you to all of you who came too. And while I was talking about the people from different states, Marilyn from Queensland is there from up in Brisbane too. Marilyn, lovely to see you. So you might have be able to connect in with Michelle. Thank you all. That's probably it for us for this year. We're really hoping that it'll be a face-to-face one on the 3rd Sunday in February next year. Linda Burney told us to invite her back again when we're ready for the Uluru Statement of the Heart. We haven't heard back from her. We're trying to keep her to her promise to come from when she said she would 5 years ago. But if not, it will be something on our first one next year will be something on the voice, because we see that as something we really need to strongly work on. Lovely to see you all. And look, Michelle, everybody stayed for the whole time, so that just shows another way.
Is that unusual?
Oh, no, not necessarily, but it just shows you how you really encouraged us all, as Seth said. So blessings on you all. We'll be in touch with you. Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, everyone.